All right, everyone, welcome. So today we're going to tackle one of the trickiest problems you'll face as a historian. It's a classic. What do you do when your star witness, the one person who was actually there, is also completely and totally biased? And there's no better case study for this than the great Greek writer Xenophon.
This question right here is really the heart of the matter. What happens when the one person who can give you the real inside scoop is also their number one fan? I mean, that's the exact problem we face when we try to understand ancient Sparta. The guy who gives us the most detailed, intimate look at their society is also its biggest cheerleader. And that guy is Xenophon.
Okay, so let's properly meet our man on the inside. You've got to understand Sparta was famously a closed box. It was super secretive, incredibly guarded, a real black hole for information. And Xenophon, he's pretty much the only literary guide we have from the classical period who can give us a key to that box. Honestly, without him, we'd pretty much be fumbling around in the dark. Now, his life story is absolutely crucial for understanding his point of view. And here's the real kicker. He wasn't even Spartan. He was born an Athenian, Sparta's arch-rival. But after a complicated series of events, he ends up fighting for Sparta and gets himself exiled from Athens because of it. And what do the Spartans do? They reward him with a whole country estate. Just let that sink in for a second. His home, his livelihood, it was all a gift from the very people he was writing about. Talk about a conflict of interest, right? And this is exactly why we can't just dismiss him. The man was completely embedded. This isn't some tourist writing a travel blog. He lived there. He breathed the air. And get this, his own sons were put through the agoge, that legendary, absolutely brutal Spartan education system. No other writer from his time had that kind of access. Nobody. That firsthand knowledge is his superpower. So, let's turn to his most important work on this topic, the Constitution of the Lakedaimonians, because this is where he constructs this incredibly powerful and, well, deeply problematic picture of Sparta. This text is ground zero for what modern historians call the Spartan mirage. His basic method is to give all the credit for everything cool about Sparta, their military, their society, their laws, to one single, almost mythical figure, a lawgiver named Lykourgos. Xenophon basically argues that this one guy had a perfect vision, wrote it all down, and, as he says here, made everyone follow the plan. It's a very neat story, but it kind of flattens centuries of complex social development into the work of one single genius. Which brings us to this key term you absolutely have to know, the Spartan mirage. What is it? It's this perfect, idealized, almost utopian vision of Sparta. A state without flaws, totally stable, filled with impossibly virtuous warriors. It's a fantastic piece of propaganda, an idea that's been influential for centuries. And Xenophon? He's one of its main architects. But we're historians, right? So we can't just look at this perfect postcard picture of Sparta and say, wow, nice. We have to start peeling back the layers and asking some tough questions. We need to treat Xenophon less like an objective reporter and more like what he is, a biased witness whose testimony needs very careful cross-examination. So here's the crucial distinction you need to make. The Constitution of the Lakedaimonians, it's not really a history book in the way we think of one. It's much, much closer to a political pamphlet. It wasn't written to give a balanced, neutral account. It was written to persuade you. It's an argument for an idealized Sparta, designed to defend it from its critics. And this table really lays out the dilemma we're facing. On the one hand, his strengths are massive. You just can't argue with first-hand knowledge and insider access. But on the other side of the scale, the weaknesses are just as huge. A glaringly pro-Spartan bias, a description of an ideal rather than the reality, and, let's be honest, a massive conflict of interest. That's the tightrope we have to walk. But just when you think you've got him pegged as a straightforward propagandist, Xenophon throws us a massive curveball. There's a twist right at the end of his book that completely changes how we have to read the whole thing. This is the moment the perfect mirage starts to crack. I mean, just imagine reading this for the first time. For 13 solid chapters, he has been building this flawless image. Sparta is the best, their discipline is unmatched, their virtue is absolute, and it's all thanks to the genius plan of Lykourgos. It is a non-stop sales pitch. And then you hit chapter 14, and bam, the record screeches to a halt. All of a sudden, he's telling us that the supposedly self-sufficient Spartans are going to their old enemies, the Persians, and begging for money, that their leaders are corrupt and chase personal glory, that they've abandoned the old ways. It's a shocking U-turn that just completely torpedoes the perfect image he just spent 13 chapters building. So why is this one little chapter such a huge deal? Well, first off, it proves Xenophon wasn't blind. He could see the massive gap between the ideal Sparta he admired and the messy, declining reality of his own day. It basically undermines his own mirage. It shows he knew the first 13 chapters weren't the whole story. And this chapter acts as a lament, a sad commentary on how far Sparta had fallen, probably written after their devastating military defeat at Leuctra. It makes him a much more complex and, frankly, more interesting source.
Okay, let's get practical. For your upcoming assessment, how do you take all this analysis and turn it into a top-grade answer? Let's put together your revision toolkit for handling a source like Xenophon.
Here is your game plan. Always start by acknowledging his unique value. You have to. But in the very next breath, you qualify that with his obvious pro-Spartan bias. Then, and this is your killer move, you bring in chapter 14 as your star piece of evidence. Use it to show that even Xenophon saw the gap between the ideal and the reality. And the big conclusion you're building towards is this. His bias doesn't make him a useless source. Not at all. It just makes him a wonderfully complex one.
And look, this critical approach is the scholarly consensus. The great Cambridge historian Paul Cartledge sums it up perfectly. He says Xenophon's work is more an idealized portrait than an accurate description. It's a picture of what Sparta should have been in Xenophon's eyes, not necessarily what it actually was day to day.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Does discovering bias in a source make it less valuable? Or does digging into that bias, understanding its origins, its purpose, and even its contradictions, actually make the source richer, more revealing, and a far more interesting puzzle to solve? I think you know my answer. That complexity, that's what makes history so fascinating.